Hi everyone, this is David Saffir. I'll be your webinar leader this afternoon. I'm a professional photographer and printmaker and also a color management consultant. And today we're going to be talking about projector calibration using the Spyder4 Elite. Now,
and I'm David Tobie. I'm here with David Saffir to get this started, and what I'm going to do is answer your questions online here. I'm going to type as fast as David talks, maybe a little faster. Now, this is a specialized webinar, the most specialized one we've done on projector calibration. It's kind of an interesting specialty topic, and David and I have been working on content about it for the last few days to prepare for this webinar. And David's got a great presentation to offer on this. I'd like to mention before we get started that we will be giving away a Spyder at the end of the event, and we have discount codes for you at the end of the event, so we hope you'll stick around. I'd also like to mention that this series has been so popular that we will probably be expanding it beyond the listed webinars, or at least we'll be expanding it when we extend the list of webinars. So if you have topics you're interested in having covered, please let us know what those are so that we can include those. So David has introduced himself pretty well. I'm going to mention another personal item, which is many of the photographs in his presentation here today are brand new shots taken last week in the Palouse in Washington State, and I think that they're lovely. I hope you enjoy them as much as I do. So send your questions on projector calibration in, and I will answer them all publicly as the presentation continues. And thank you for speaking for us, David.
thanks David. I apologize for jumping the gun a little bit there. I had thought that you had already done that. And done that in the sense that you had started the presentation. So that's not normally the way we do things, folks. We're a little bit smoother than that. So in any event, yeah, these photos are from a workshop that I was running along with Jack Klein a couple of weeks ago up in the Palouse. That's in northwestern Washington State. We had a lot of fun with it, and the color is really quite interesting. And we're going to keep that thought in mind as we go forward. Now, let me get right on to my introduction. There we go. You know, we've all tried or used front projectors from time to time. They come in a lot of flavors, different manufacturers, different types, et cetera, but they all need some sort of color management and calibration. And although the process looks similar to display calibration, some of the things that we're going to try to achieve in managing these devices are a little bit different. I can't emphasize enough, though, that how important that projector can be in promoting your photography business or promoting your work. And just to give you an example, I know people who photograph weddings and photograph life events, and there's an enormous difference for them in terms of sales if they simply show a family prints versus projecting those images on screen in the comfort of somebody's living room, their living room, or the client's living room. Sales double, triple, and they sell larger prints and obviously do much better financially. And so the projector becomes a profit center for them, not just a device to show pictures with. So they're very important in that aspect. They're important in exhibitions and displays, in teaching, in discussions, et cetera, et cetera. And projector calibration is accurate. It's easy to use. In fact, I would say it's in some respects easier to use than a monitor calibration device. It's a little simpler, and the software is a little bit more automated. And so you should not let yourself be intimidated by the idea that this is going to be something that's uphill all the way. I would also suggest that you think about the appearance of your work before you start projector presentation. The projector isn't going to make up for anything that's lacking or weak in your folio of images and the information that you want to convey. And color is really an important part of the message, particularly as far as your credibility goes. A lot of people will put an image up on the screen and I think we've all been there. Don't worry, I'll fix the color later, or I'm sorry about the projector, it's just not working right. You really want to make sure that each presentation shows your work properly. And the color doesn't have to be 99.999% accurate, but it has to be reasonable and pleasing and realistic. And I think if you're in that space, that you're going to be very comfortable with your presentation, and so will your audience. Now, a quick poll. I'd like to know from you if you use projectors for any of these. You can give multiple answers. Presentations to potential new clients, exhibits and displays, teaching software, for example, Photoshop or photo editing, sales presentations, for example, portrait or wedding images, or photo competition. Okay, it's an interesting mix. Presentation to new clients, exhibits and displays, almost 50%, teaching software, almost 50%. It's interesting too, photo competition is up over 40%. It's been very interesting to watch the different organizations in the photo clubs using the projectors for so-called print competition or photo competition. I have to click on this. There we go. So one of the things about projectors is you can spend a little bit of money or quite a bit of money, and the fact is that you really need to match a projector to your requirements, and in 99 out of 100 cases that doesn't mean that you have to spend a ton of money on them. I mean, I've seen people advertising projectors for home theater or even for use by corporations that are in the 5-figure range, and it's really swatting a fly with an elephant gun. Although the color quality varies greatly amongst all of these, from the least to the most expensive, certainly the highest tech aren't necessarily the right ones for the job. You need to take into consideration the size of the room, the size of the audience, and in particular the lighting controls and the ambient light that's in the room. The ambient light is one of the, I wouldn't say most important, but very important factors in your success in using the projector in a way that shows your work to its best advantage. You're looking at portability and durability, whether you're going to own or borrow or rent. And one of the things that I would look at is the manufacturers didn't used to do this, but they do in some degree now, is to provide some protection for the bulb. That bulb that drives the whole device can be quite expensive, and in the past they didn't have any automation for the fans to cool the bulb, and so if, for example, someone pulled the plug out accidentally, all of a sudden you're standing there with a bill for $200 or $300 or $400 for a new projector bulb. Well, nowadays there's some safeguards built in, and of course if you're thinking about getting a machine or replacing the one that you have, look for those features because they potentially will save you quite a bit of money. And of course there's always the debate of using a projector versus flat screen versus paper, and in markets like wedding and portrait and event, it's been my personal experience and the experience of a lot of my friends and colleagues that the projector is the way to upsell clients and upsell them from 8x10s to 16x20 or even larger prints. And of course your margins and your profits are going to be much better on the larger prints than on the smaller ones. So it's something to consider. Now, matching your projector to your requirements, there's a number of things here. I don't mean to overwhelm you with a ton of details. This presentation, by the way, is going to be available online. It's being recorded. Match your projector to your requirements. There are some people who are presenting to small groups, you know, a half dozen family members or business colleagues, and they don't really need a very large projector. And there's other people who are projecting to bigger groups, just, you know, presenting to bigger groups. So you're looking at the size of the unit, its output, what type of projection technology it uses, its available contrast and color accuracy, resolution. Wireless is really a nice feature if you can afford it, and of course the connector type. And just a quick word on that: if you've got a choice at the same price between two projectors that are otherwise similar, and one of them is VGA and the other one is DVI, take the DVI connector every time. Now, the LCD projectors versus what's called the DLP projectors, there's two main types. LCD projectors generally give richer color saturation, including in rooms with a significant amount of ambient light. They use less power, they create less heat, but they're bigger machines. And so they're a little bit annoying to carry around. And the black point is a little bit less intense than the DLP projectors. The DLP projectors, the pixels are less visible. You see a little bit less of the so-called screen door effect that you sometimes see with the less expensive LCDs. It does generate blacker blacks and higher contrast, but the thing that you give up with these devices is that typically there's poorer reds and yellows. And this says at full power, but my experience has been at almost any power setting. So, you know, take a look at them. And in fact, if you're thinking about getting a projector, if you can persuade the seller to put you in a conference room with, say, your top two choices, you're probably going to be ahead of the game in terms of picking the one that really suits you. In the DLP projectors, color saturation often suffers, but they are smaller and convenient. They generally tend to run quite a bit hotter in terms of color temperature. So there's some things to think about in terms of which one you might get at some point down the road. There we go. Now, if you travel, you often have little control over ambient lighting. And, you know, I'll have to say that there's been times where I've gotten into it with a show organizer, and they've said, well, we just can't turn the lights down that far, or this, that, or the other thing. And I have gotten on their case about it, because that ambient lighting is really driving the perception of quality of what's being shown on the wall. And so the lower you can get at the ambient lighting, as a general rule, the happier you're going to be, and so the happier your audience is going to be. And a little tip for you, two things: take extension cables, take adapters for connectors, and take a laser pointer with you. Those things are all, I would have to say, indispensable if you're presenting to a group on location. In general, if you're looking at output settings or output capability, if the ambient light is low and you have, you know, less than a dozen people, 2,000 to 3,000 lumens will get the job done. If the ambient light is moderate and you've got up to, say, 100 people, you're going to be wanting to get up into the 5,000 lumen range. And then, this is maybe an inappropriate remark, but if you've got 500 people, you know, you're looking for a flamethrower. You know, 5,000 K lumens or more. There is a point of diminishing returns with that. And so, if that ambient light is high and you have a big group, I would be, again, right in front of the person who's running the facility and say, let's get the lighting down, at least in the front of the room. I can understand why you need some light in the back so people can move around and, you know, be comfortable and that sort of thing, because they come and go. But the front of the room, you've got to give me some slack here and let me present the way I need to. Some of the manufacturers talk about a super high contrast ratio, and, you know, a gazillion to 1, et cetera, et cetera. And as we'll see later on, that gazillion to 1 contrast ratio actually makes things look pretty darn funky. What you want is an appropriate contrast ratio. Maybe a machine with, you know, 3,000 to 1. but you know, you really don't need broadcast quality or, you know, home theater type output levels for stuff like this. You do want to look for a projector that offers what's called an sRGB mode. You want to have that color space, you know, that color space is your friend. And in fact, I'm going to show you a little bit later on. I personally own an older projector, which frankly needs to be replaced. And it has a much smaller gamut than sRGB, and it still does all right, but I would be better off, and so would my customers, if I had a more capable device. When you're going to use one of these machines, do warm it up before you use it or before you calibrate it. They do change pretty dramatically in the first couple of minutes. It's really not a good idea to walk in, plug the thing in, and start right away. That's definitely not good. If you can give it 10 or 15 minutes of running with a slide on the screen before you really get going, that would be great. You want to calibrate it obviously before you start, and it's a 10-minute cycle, so it's not that much of a demand on your time, and if you can arrive a little bit ahead of time, no big deal. And again, I come back again and again to control that ambient light, because that's your friend. Now, did I just skip some slides here? I got a slide out of place. Let's just do this poll, and then I will fix this other thing. So let's ask a question of people. When do you calibrate the projector? Never, always in your studio, occasionally in your studio, always on location, or occasionally on location. So let's take a look at that data. Well, that's interesting. That question got a little bit more interest than the last one. And it's also interesting to me, it says 16% always calibrated in studio. I suggest that you rethink that. And please don't believe that I'm, you know, singling out this group for criticism. But if you're in the studio and you have a chance to do this, and you're working with the same screen all the time, you can dial this thing in and attend to it occasionally and make sure that it's on track. I can see on location that it could become an issue. But even more so on location, it's very, very important. And here's the reason. There's everything imaginable out there. And I do presentations all the time. Excuse me, I'm going to get a sip of water. I do presentations all the time with other people's projectors, and they are wildly different. And, you know, being able to control that device and make it work in that locale is really a key factor in my credibility with that audience. If for example, I'm showing images that I've taken from a workshop, I'd say I'm promoting a workshop, or I'm simply there to show people what a location is like. I do that sometimes. And the color is off. It doesn't really make a very good, or just the contrast, it doesn't really make a very good impression. It doesn't add to the credibility of the information that I'm trying to convey. It takes it away. So I would suggest that, particularly since the Spyder is a multi-purpose device, that you consider doing that. Okay, let's just click here. Now, hang on one second. What slide am I on? 14. I just need to digress for a second. Yeah, see, it did skip forward. Okay. Let's go right to here. Yep. Sorry for the delay, folks. Okay, so the Spyder4 Elite is a full spectrum color sensor, and there's a couple of things on here that I think are important for you to understand. You know, this device was released not too long ago, and unlike some product launches where, you know, less filling tastes great is the order of the day. The Spyder4 really has improved. It's a 7-channel sensor. It does cover the the color spectrum better than the 3-channel RGB devices. You can use it to calibrate laptops, desktops, wide gamut displays, whether they're LED or other technologies. And it's calibrated to see color the way one's eye sees color. Now, by objective measurement, the accuracy is improved 26%, and it's a good all-around tool. And frankly, I've got one in my laptop bag everywhere I go because I use it not on a daily basis, but very, very frequently. Okay. Now, when you start the software, very similarly to calibrating, say, your laptop or your desktop, actually there's a screen that I left out, but I'm going to talk about it for a second. The screen, one of the screens that comes up has a very important message on it, which I'll repeat, and that is to warm the darn thing up before you do anything with it. And that includes all of these displays. Give it a chance to settle down and get comfortable itself before you start telling it what to do. You install the software and connect the Spyder4 device via your USB port, and the wizard will ask you to choose your display type. And then you make sure that the opening screen is on the target display, or on the projector, on the projector screen, because that's the one that's going to be obviously going to be adjusted. You're going to see a question about turning on controls. Some of these devices have them, some don't. Certainly you want to make sure that you follow the instructions here. And then, unlike using the laptop display or the desktop display calibration, you're going to do something a little bit different here. If you're going to choose full calibration of your display, which of course I suggest the first time you go through this, is you're going to want to use a gamma of 2.2, but then they recommend the native brightness and white point. I'm going to get into the reasons for this in a minute. And you can certainly use other adjustments, particularly if you're using dual projectors. But if you're using a single projector, the native settings will serve you well. Now, there's also a note at the bottom of this, is that you can make more than one profile for your projector. So let's say you're going out for a few days on a teaching assignment. You're going to visit 2 or 3 different places, and you happen to know that in one place the ambient light is very bright, and in another place the ambient light is relatively cool and low key. You can make profiles for brighter rooms and less bright rooms and access them from the computer, and I'll show you how to do that a little bit later on. It's on a later screen. But the point is that you can make more than this work. Spyder is connected to the computer and the software is up and running. And as you can see here inside the red circle, where my cursor is currently hovering, you simply mount this on a tripod or on a light stand. I typically use a light stand that has a mounting thread at the top that's the appropriate size. And you put it about a foot in front of the screen. So if you look over here at this top-down diagram, you put it about a foot in front of the screen, and it doesn't really matter if there's a bit of a shadow on the screen. What you want to do is make sure that the Spyder4 is centered on that, and the sensor sees wide enough to pick up the color from the screen. That the projector is going to be projecting different color patches onto the screen, and the Spyder will see it all in spite of the shadow. Now, some people are skeptical about that, but that's really not an issue at all. Now it's going to go through those color patches, and I'm sure all of us that have calibrated a display have seen one color patch after another, red, green, blue, and a series of black and white, sometimes gray patches. And what the device is doing is it's projecting those colors onto the screen, and the Spyder is reading them and doing a quantitative measurement of the color value of each patch, and it's saying, well, that patch is +3 and that patch is -1, and it's remembering all of those to an adjustment table. And that adjustment table is going to be used down the road. It's called profile. It's loosely termed. And that's going to be used to adjust the color in your projector the next time you start up and select that profile. That color is going to be and of course the contrast and brightness, as good as they can be for that particular device. So it's going to go through that iteration, and then you're going to name it. And this one in particular has the name of the manufacturer and the model number. Now, normally what I would do would be to also put the date on here, because I want to know when I made the profile. They don't last forever. In particular, projector bulbs get pretty darned hot, and if I was using mine consistently, I would probably profile it every week. There might be people that disagree with me, but if I'm using that thing 2 or 3 times a week, I definitely would be profiling it pretty frequently, more so than I would be, say, my laptop or desktop. Okay. I think we did this already. Now, another one of the screens that comes up, which is very useful, is called the Spyder Proof, the Calibrated View. And this allows you to preview your display profile, and there's 4 main sections. You can see my cursor moving: black and white, and then a landscape segment, what I call the still life segment, which includes a color chart, and then some portraits. And you can switch the profile on and off to see what happened, what kind of impact your profiling cycle has had on the color that you're projecting. It's a very useful tool. It's very straightforward. It gives you a before and after view. If you double click on any one of these quadrants, it will enlarge to fill the screen. So if I double click on these color objects here, it will expand to fill the screen. If I double click on the color chart, it will expand again to fill the screen, etc., etc. So you can look at each one of these in turn depending on what sort of work you're going to be projecting. And of course, black and white is very, very useful for gauging the effectiveness of a profile, because there's, I hate to say this, but there's no distraction from color. You can look at shadow and highlight, detail, and gradations very closely, and it's also a very useful alternative to just using color. There's also a utility provided that I think is very, very useful. If you have 2 projectors, or you have a projector and you're just not quite satisfied with what you're seeing, you can make small adjustments to the profile before you save it. So you can make visual adjustments here. And my suggestion to you is to make small adjustments. And you can change the white point, apparent white point, slightly. You can do it in small steps, increments. And you can fine-tune based on any of these 4 major areas, or all of them, until you're satisfied that you have what you want. And this is a particularly valuable tool. It's, how do I put this? I think it's unique. I think it gives the photographer credit for knowing what they're doing, and gives them an opportunity to exercise their judgment. Now, here's a little bit of a test. I'm just going to switch to a couple of screens here. This is an unmodified version of that screen, and you can see that it's pretty color neutral. And then here's one that's been treated with a blue filter in Photoshop. And take note of something. The color images don't look that different, particularly after you've been looking at them for a few minutes. And the black and white images, they have a bit of a blue tint to them. But what's going to happen in virtually every case, as you sit there and look at these, particularly if they are the brightest things in the room, they're going to start to neutralize. The eye and brain are very, very good at finding the white point and the point of neutrality and the gray point and adjusting to them. So even in a room, for the classic example, even in a room with incandescent lighting, your eye will eventually adjust and the room won't look yellow to you anymore. It will start to shift towards white. And the same thing will happen, for example, even if you're projecting on a colored wall. So one of the messages here is, don't worry that much about if you are forced to project without a screen. Don't worry about that too much. If the wall has a slight tint to it, if it's tan, don't worry about that too much. It's more important that the device is calibrated, to tell you the truth, and the eye will adjust. Now, there is an issue, however, is that if there are lights in the field of view, and I include exit signs in this category, by the way, it's kind of the bane of a photographer's existence on the road, that yellow and green sign is going to affect people's color vision whether they like it or not. And so, those are things to consider when you're picking a direction to project and, which wall to use, et cetera, et cetera. So let's just flip back and forth again. So there's unadjusted and there's adjusted. Whoops, I went the wrong way. Pardon me. Let's go back. So you can see there's a small difference, but the eye will adjust. And we talked a little bit before, and this is sort of getting you under the hood of what's going on. If you look at this screen right now, people always ask me, well, what's the real white point? The white point is the whitest thing on the screen. And we're looking at this square, and to me it looks white. And I think most of you will agree it looks white. And yet, if I go to the next slide, that white square is actually about 20% gray, and this white square in the middle is actually pure white here. So you can see how the eye adjusts. When you first looked at this, I'll bet that most of you thought that's a white square, and then all of a sudden we have a really white square in the middle. And so that native white point, whatever it is in terms of degrees Kelvin, unless it's ridiculously off, is going to be okay as people continue to look at it. And the other adjustments are equally, or you could argue even more important. If you have dual projectors, if you look at these two squares, the one on the left has a blue tint, but that white square looks pretty white, isn't it? But it's actually light blue. And on the right, that square is treated yellow, and it looks a little bit yellow. And side by side, you can see the color tint. But if you had one of these by itself, it would begin to look like this, because the eye and brain inevitably adjust to the whitest, brightest thing in their field of view. So you can just see as you go back and forth. Now, one of the things that's really good for getting dual projectors online, I'm going to back up a few slides here, is SpyderTune. And you can use SpyderTune to make those micro adjustments between the two so that even if you have different machines projecting, you can get them pretty darn close. So if you've got two devices showing two different presentations or overlapping presentations, you can get them a lot closer than you could normally just do by calibrating each one individually. So you can use SpyderTune to dial them both in and get yourself to the point where these side-by-side dual projectors look pretty darn good. Now, we're just going to talk a little bit about the data that's produced in here. I just want to point out something. We've been talking about contrast ratios, and if you look right up here, and we've also been talking about some other measurements and adjustments, you can see down here that the gamma originally on my, and I have to say, funky projector was really out of line at 2.74, really not getting the job done. And after it was calibrated, our target was 2.20. After it was calibrated, it was 2.03, which is acceptable. Not great, but acceptable. I know people that calibrate their desktops to 2.0 and a lower color temperature because it's their personal preference. And I also want to point out here that the black and white points, there's not a 3,000-to-1 contrast ratio going on here. It goes from 15 to 100, basically to 115, right? That's 10-to-1. So there's some things to think about in terms of, the marketing hype that comes from the companies. You're looking for a comfortable contrast ratio, and if you look, I put this image in here not just because it's the strangest building I've ever seen in my life, but because the dynamic range that's in this building is really seriously broad, and you've got really, really deep shadows and some very demanding transition areas, and areas that are barely holding detail in the bright areas, say here on the top of the building. And so you really want to be in control of the brightness of the projector and the contrast, and those are just as important as controlling the color, because if, for example, you've got the brightness cranked up the way some manufacturers recommend, you have no hope of seeing any detail in this building, really anywhere in this area where my pointer is or anywhere down near the ground. And so, and of course, if you crank it down too low, a lot of the lower midtone and shadow detail is just going to vanish. Now, the profile overview, this is pretty interesting, and I don't know how many of you have seen this before, but this is part of the Spyder4 Elite software, and this gives you a lot of good information about not only standard color space. For example, my pointer is on sRGB. That's the blue line right here. Okay, and you've got the red, green, and blue points on this. But you can also see that the projector is outlined in red, and although it is seriously smaller than sRGB, it's not that distorted. Once it's been calibrated, it's actually in pretty good shape. The reds have been pushed over, not pushed over, the reds are pushed over. It's inherent to the device pretty far. In other words, you're not getting the kind of performance that you would if it was an sRGB projector, a newer machine. But the triangle is more or less in balance. It's not rotated to the right or the left significantly, twisted, in other words. And so it's going to give you a reason, and it's reasonably balanced over the white point, not perfectly. So it's going to give you a reasonably balanced image when you make your projection. So this chart can be very helpful to you in understanding what your device is going to do when you put it on the table and start showing your images. Now, there's a series of reports. I'm just going to pick one of them here to talk about briefly, and that's the color accuracy. The color accuracy report will give you a look at the performance of the device vis-a-vis each one of those color patches that were shown earlier, and how much above or below the standard that's required that each one of them falls into. Pardon me, I'm having trouble with English for a second here. But in any event, that table, which is a series of bar charts, can show you where the strengths and weaknesses are in your color palette. And it's a very, very useful report. So take a look at these. Of course, if you do decide to get the Spyder4, and they are also quite useful for laptop and desktop displays. Now, screen uniformity, I have to say, really has almost no use in the world of projectors. You're Most screens are old and not very clean, unfortunately. Most people are projecting on a wall that's been painted haphazardly, and it's probably not very clean. And so the uniformity of brightness in that circumstance is probably going to be pretty iffy, pretty darned iffy. But there are, there are a whole series of tools in here that are available for a number of reasons, and some of them can be used quite effectively when you're testing a projector. Now, I want to point something out, and this is really important, is that it's not only true for projectors, it's true for just about every display device that you have. You can make more than one profile for each of them. And if you name them in a way that allows you to remember what you intended, whether it's, this one is for a bright room, this one is for a dim room, you can have several calibrations for projector A. You can have a set of calibrations for when you're using two projectors. And all you have to do is take this panel and make sure that it's appearing on the screen of the device that you want to adjust, and change, basically just click on the profile that you want to use for that device at that time, and it will go to work. And that's a very, very useful thing. So you can have you can have two projectors, and you can have a profile for each one. You can have almost an unlimited number of combinations. Now, of course, your life might get a little bit complicated if you have to calibrate all of these all the time, and I don't bring that up to be mean. I'm just pointing out that you have to stay current with them. But the flexibility that you can have in terms of adapting to your environment is significant. And it's important to remember that you can do that. You're not just stuck with one profile. And you can, make yourself look good no matter where you go. So, it's all about color. The color really is the thing that's the color and the contrast, the details. To me, it's almost like looking at a print. You've got to have it all. You've got to have that sense of depth. You've got to have realistic contrast, believable colors. They don't have to be perfect, but they have to be believable at least. Because it's just not going to cut it if you put that image up on the screen and you say, you can fix this color in Photoshop. It's just a projector. And what I found is, particularly if I'm teaching or I'm presenting to a group of students or I'm selling, that just doesn't cut it. People just go, this is what it is. Most of them don't understand how this can be flexible in another medium, whether it's on print or a different display. And one of the tests of this is if you are using a projector and you turn your laptop around and everybody goes, oh my God, because the laptop is so different than the screen that they don't know what to believe, then you really do have an issue you need to address. So the credibility is image quality. I had a teacher once said, David, it's all about your book. Well, that's what it's about. It's about the quality of that image and how it looks on the screen. And that is the thing that will serve you well and help you with your professional credibility and your business and your profitability. Yep, and I believe that's, this is a specialized topic, so we're about 10 minutes ahead of schedule, barring questions. And of course, I know David is pounding away trying to answer all the questions that have come in. And so I'm wondering, are there some questions that I can answer while I'm on air here, or if I should wrap up?
Well, I'm going to keep working on the few remaining questions here, David. I don't know if there's anything we need to address verbally, but I'd be happy to actually answer a few of these verbally. Someone's asking if Mac laptop monitors really require calibration. I think you and I both would agree that yes, they absolutely do. I actually have the latest and greatest Retina display. I've been frothing at the mouth about how wonderful that display is, and yet it still requires calibration to actually be a good photographic device. Let me look through any of these others.
Yeah, I just add a comment that, although I haven't worked much with Lion, but certainly previous versions of the Mac operating system have a so-called calibration utility that is supposed to let you calibrate the display by eye, and I'm here to tell you it can't be done. If you really want to get accurate color and luminance out of any display that you have, you really need a calibration device. I have to leave the microphone for a second. I'll be right back.
Well, let me answer the next question here, which has to do with USB extension cables. There are booster cables, which you can use virtually any length of. The Spyder is very forgiving about USB extension cables. I will admit, patched at least a couple of the standard length ones together, plus the standard cable, in order to use it with projection. The way it tends to work with projection is you have to stand somewhere with your computer, and the projector is somewhere else, and the screen is in a third place. And usually you can come to some compromise for calibration purposes, but on occasion you end up in a situation where you either need a 15-foot tall light stand to reach the screen, or you need a 20-foot long cable to get back to your laptop. So it can be challenging under circumstances who were not set up with calibration in mind to calibrate certain projectors, and there's not much you can do about that except carry extension cables if you're expecting this kind of situation, and be creative in terms of the things you stack up to get your Spyder up to the screen in situations where it's high.
One thing I didn't hear the whole exchange, but one thing I could add to this perhaps is that there are USB cables that have boosters in them, and they're not very expensive. And you can get one booster cable and really get a lot more reach out of your connection to your Spyder that way. So it's just something to think about. And they have them at Best Buy and Fry's, and even sometimes at Radio Shack.
Yeah, those are all good points, and I believe we've covered them
okay, thank you.
appropriately.
I was away from the screen for a minute. Somebody knocked on the door.
So this is the most specialized webinar we've ever done. We've had hundreds of people here, which is pretty cool for a webinar this specialized. I'm going to assume some of you people are here kind of to get an idea about this weird idea of calibrating presentation projectors and other projection uses, while some of you probably do this fairly regularly and hoping for tips on how to do it better or how to do it conveniently. I've certainly been answering questions that kind of covered both those categories. So it's nice to see that we get a broad range of users who are doing this thing. I mean, monitor calibration is really what color management started out with. And as we move on to things like big TVs and projectors and iPads as the way that we really show our images much of the time, the Spyder's had to keep up to be able to offer consistency in color between all of those devices. So that's really what Spyder4 is about, is kind of calibrating anything that you're likely to be putting an image on.
And I'd like to add something to that. I've used a number of devices to calibrate projectors, and this particular device and the software that goes with it are the easiest ones to use I've ever had.
Yeah, I've also had comments from people who work for the competition even that this is the best device. Spyder4 does the best job of calibrating projectors of anything they've ever used, and when they say that, they mean including multi-$1,000 devices that seem much more exotic and more appropriate to advanced calibration. But in fact, there's something about the Spyder4 that they're more happy with as a calibration device for their projectors. So David, I know you're traveling and have a plane to catch. We appreciate your giving this presentation for us, and I'll stick around and answer a few more of these questions silently after we close down the webinar. But I'd like to thank David Saffir for joining us today and let him get on with the matter of awarding a Spyder if he hasn't done that yet. Has that been done, David?
The winner is, forgive me if I pronounce this incorrectly, Gary Bollard, and we will email him shipping information.
Excellent.
And there is a discount code for everyone. If you go onto the the Datacolor website and you decide to order directly, the discount code is Projector1, and you'll see the discount in your cart when you go to checkout.
So the only things you need to be able to do to use that discount on any Spyder product is to be able to spell Projector in lowercase with a 1 on it. And remember that this discount is only valid on the Datacolor web store on our website, but it would be valid for any product. We're not going to force you to buy a projector calibrator to use this code. You can buy anything you'd like there.
I want to thank Datacolor for their sponsorship of the webinar. This has been a great series. I really appreciate the opportunity to participate. David Tobie's, just to give you some additional information, there's some great information on David Tobie's blog. It's cdtobie.wordpress.com, and he has a website at cdtobie.com. My blog address is davidsaffir.wordpress.com, and my website is davidsaffir.com. And a last thing is that for my students, I'm perfectly happy to answer emails, questions, etc. Just send me an email. I do travel fairly frequently. If you don't get an answer from me in 24 hours, please do send the email again, and I'll do my best to pick it up and answer you in a timely fashion. So thank you all for attending. We're going to continue to announce webinars on other subjects related to getting the most out of your photography, so we hope that you'll join us then. Thanks, everyone.